The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
The business of criminal investigations can be a minefield. Any of us can walk into this amazing world armed with the best intentions and start puttering around in what looks like a soft pasture on a beautiful day. Then boom, we accidentally step on something that puts us, other people, and the investigation into harm's way. I'm going to help you identify the most common landmines. Here's a hint. They're rarely in plain view. You've got to know what you're looking for and where to look. This is nothing new for the murder cops. These charges and tripwires are everywhere we turn. Part of sharpening our saw is learning how to navigate around or avoid them. From True Crime and Consequences. Does the true crime community help with murder investigations or hurt them? By David Lyons. Welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. Today is one of my special interviews with an author and a fellow podcaster, David Lyons of the Murder Police podcast. David served 28 years in law enforcement, many of them commanding the homicide unit. Retired now, he and his wife, Wendy, began the amazing and successful Murder Police podcast back in 2020. And David and Wendy work from the position that, unlike what we see on TV and the movies, crimes are solved by collaborating teams with each member bringing a specialty to the table, working in coordination to bring justice to the cases, victims, and families. Told from the viewpoint of the murder police, who refer to those who hold their hands up, take the oath, and actively investigate homicides, their podcast is factual, accurate, procedural, and should never be missed. David and I are talking about his new book, True Crime and Consequences, which I found incredibly valuable and one to be taken by the heart of all of us in the true crime community, especially the creators. With the true crime community expanding rapidly, zeroing in on and consuming cases that make headlines across the media and internet, this book is vital to maintaining the accuracy, integrity, and viability of our judicial institutions. True Crime and Consequences thoughtfully examines what the true crime community is, the roles played, and the impact on law enforcement, investigation, civil liberties, and justice. I feel like just in the nick of time, David Lyons provides an insightful look into how podcasts, social media, and amateur investigators are transforming modern justice, both positively and negatively. He draws on personal experiences and a wealth of knowledge, highlighting real crime cases disrupted by well-meaning true crime enthusiasts. As the saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So let me welcome David Lyons to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. David, I am honored to have you here.
It's wonderful to meet you, and thank you for the opportunity.
I'm so delighted to meet you. I've been a fan for a long time.
Oh, good. That's always a neat thing to hear, especially when I travel. It's kind of interesting to meet people who have heard or watched the show. Just last week, I was out on the road in Texas and pitched the book. I usually pitch it around Thursday if I have a full week, and one of the guys in there, he said, I've already got it in my Kindle queue. And he goes, I knew your name looked familiar. And I'm like, okay, that's a small world. So kind of neat.
Yeah. Well, I was reading in the book, you always wear your T-shirt or your hat.
Something.
Tell everybody about your podcast, The Murder Police.
Yeah, it's a show that I started with Wendy, my wife, probably I'm coming up on maybe 5 or 6 years ago, coming up on 5 probably. When I retired from the police department, I was interested in getting into the podcast world. There were a couple other people I was talking to at the same time, a former Commonwealth attorney and a popular AM radio DJ here in Kentucky, and listened to a lot of podcasting. I knew we wanted to be victim centered. And I looked back at my favorite part of my career, which was that handful of years as a murder cop. And I'd listened to a lot of true crime and became fans of a lot of really well-researched, well-produced true crime shows. But I also noticed that there's a part of the true crime world that's really not authentic, really kind of naive, maybe to say it at best, if not just, I hate to say this, anti-police. And I thought we can do better by people by offering things that don't exploit victims, advocating for victims and justice, and maybe even by interviewing the people that actually do the work, dispelling some of those urban myths out there that really can actually be destructive to people who are surviving the loss of someone to violence. So we started out, Wendy's the co-host because she's a true crime fanatic. That is literally pretty much all that is allowed on TV. I was allowed to watch some of the Alone series on Netflix today, and surprised I didn't get bumped off of that during breakfast. So, but that's pretty much the genesis of it. So we started it, and as a hobby, it's done pretty well. It ranks pretty high globally among podcasts, and went multi-channel a little over a year ago on YouTube, and that's the growth rate on YouTube is pretty impressive too. So maybe we're pulling a thread on something that is beneficial. So.
We were starting our podcast about the same time.
Okay.
I'm a retired psychology educator. I taught for 30 years. We moved out to Pennsylvania. My husband was going to UPenn. And it's like, I've always loved true crime. I've always been interested in this. What am I going to do with myself? And here I am.
I was interested in how you got started as well. What draws us into this? I think for me, maybe the beautiful part is the independent, the indie. As a matter of fact, this sounds weird, but I kind of get resentful of the major networks when they dove into this world that I really think was made by independent creators. And then the big guys come in and maybe overly polished and nudged out some people that had a voice too. That's just a personal opinion in the genre of podcasting, but it's interesting how we get interested in it. So,
yeah, I had a lifelong love, like your wife, like Wendy, for true crime. I hate to be repeating myself for my listeners, but in New Jersey, the AP Psych exam is at the beginning of May, and school ends the end of June. Mm-hmm. So you've been working towards this exam all these months. You take the exam. Now what do you do with graduating seniors? Well, you go into the psychology of serial killers, because I have a fascination. I know there's something wrong with me, but I do. I have a fascination with serial killers, and have literally, the murder shelf is a big giant bookshelf of all of my books from 40 years on serial killers. So I took that knowledge base and have worked it into what I do. I am not an investigator. That's why I read your book with such passion. Like, I've not been to Quantico. I was a teacher. And I read your book because I want to make sure I'm doing it right. Because again, you jump into this and you have no idea what you're doing. You're just like, well, I'm going to do a podcast. I've watched the YouTube. I can do this.
Right. You said something. Can I kind of help correct you? I don't think there's anything wrong with you at all in being fascinated by a serial killer. And I think that when we talk about what draws people to true crime, I think most people are just, in my opinion, and psychology is your thing, so I may hit a lick with this, it's not a morbid curiosity or fascination. It's the idea that they do something that isn't going to cross your and my mind. It isn't. If we had to defend ourselves or a loved one, it would probably destroy us emotionally for the rest of our lives. And I've had friends that unfortunately in our business have had to take a life, and it's a huge interrupter compared to what Hollywood thinks. So I don't think there's anything about that. And me sitting in a room with those people was the same thing, as you're knee to knee with them. And the entire time in the back of your mind, you're like, what makes you click? What is that silicone switch that goes bam? and you start to do these horrible things without any conscience to it or at all, especially with a serial killer. So I don't see anything unusual about that. Now, if you had Ted Bundy's bite mark impressions tattooed on your arm, I would worry about you. But
No.
I hear that women have done that. I've heard people have done it. That might be a little over the edge, but I think it's a natural thing that we wrestle with good and evil. And you and I, again, would never think about doing that. And then we see somebody that does that. So
I get upset with the torture of animals, or a cat is left out in the rain. Never even mind going there. I just wanted to understand why they do what they do. And now with my Patreon group, I do a case study and my analysis of a serial killer. Every month we have our meeting. You know what it is? I've read all the research. I've taken it to heart. I really understand it. I'll explain to you, the background and the genetics and the whole thing. And then I'll go, and I don't understand why they do what they do. Because our brains cannot process that. It's trying to breathe water. Breathing water.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think I finally accepted with most of the people. Now, there are people that take a human life, and there are in flagrante delicto, there's emotional disturbances. Those exist. But when you sit down with somebody like that, I finally had to lay it to rest with the word evil. And not because I think it stops there as far as what that is, but it's not logical, and it's not. And again, it defies everything we think about a fellow human being, what we do or not to do. And I worked several serial killer cases and just found out this year that a case I worked, I guess 30 years ago, was a serial killer. It was an unsolved we had, and we worked it, had nothing. Come to find out, it was the same guy that killed the 4 kids in Texas in the yogurt shop murders. And that's really fresh. That just happened. And I saw another retired commander in a parking lot of our pharmacy last week, and she's gone back 2 days a week to be a cold case analyst with the department. And I told Ann, I said, you don't know you have a serial killer till you know you have a serial killer. And in everyone I worked with, it was an individual focused thing until you got something that started to connect the dots. And once they connect quickly. But again, this guy is dead. We will never know what even and a true boogeyman. I mean, I worked with Resendez Ramirez, Tommy Lynn Sells. I carried that case when he killed a 13-year-old girl here in town. You start to get an idea of what their MO is, but that's never the motive, really. It's just how they operate. And those were rail riders, and they jump off a train. They would pick somebody of opportunity and bludgeon them to death or strangle them to death and cut them to death and then go. But this cat that killed the 4 kids in Texas, and there's other ones he's responsible for, I don't know if they'll ever know why he picked Linda Rutledge and located her in Lexington, and she was found in her parents' hearing aid store. She was shot twice in the head and lit on fire. I don't know if we'll ever understand that, and now we don't have the opportunity to at least let him gloat. Sometimes they'll half tell the truth if they, if they gloat a little bit. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And I liked what you said in the beginning about keeping things victim-centered.
For sure. For sure.
I think that is critical. From day one, I've endeavored to, pick books, because I tell the author's story, plus I do my own research and then the psychology end of it. But I've tried to pick books where I can put the victims in the center of the investigation. And it's just so critically important.
Right. And a friend of mine that did a Rance review on the book, when he wrote the review, used the word sometimes terse, because I emphasize it that hard. And if I have a criticism of any of the people in the realm, fiction, nonfiction, print, visual media, audio media, is when they deviate and they start to exploit what's happened to this person for that, I guess we could call it clicks or attention. And I know that in an investigation, if you deviate from victim focus, then biases start to come in. You start to get confirmation bias. All of that thing happens. And on the inside, for an investigator, you could start losing patience for some very frustrated family and friends that are left behind, because that grieving process, you're often the wall of that. You're the place they come to yell at, to scream at, to tell you how bad you're doing. And I've always said that part of that business is understanding that you're you're kind of softly ministering to these people. And part of that is taking that frustration and absorbing it and maybe seeing if it's valid. But these families are in a place I can't let my imagination wander to. I can't. So back to it again. If we stay victim-centered, I think our content is respectful, it's accurate, and in investigations, no matter if it's a detective or a layperson, that guides you to do it virtuously, to do it for the right reasons. So I think that was a big underlying theme of the book. When I got your email and you were telling me the things that you highlighted, as a new author, I was like, yes, because what that meant is the things I was trying to get across seemed to have reverberated with the reader. So I was very tickled to see those things because I know they meant a lot to me when I was writing it.
Good. I have to tell you, I could have gone on for another 3 pages of things that I internalized while I was reading it. And I picked out things that I thought were really critical to make sure that we got to. Because there's just so much. First, I have to say this. Guys, when you read David's book, True Crimes and Consequences, it's like you are having a conversation with him. You have to listen to Murder Police first, because I had his voice in my head. For me, it took about 3 hours to read the book. I just devoured it. So for 3 hours, David, you're talking to me in your voice in my head while I'm reading this. And that was a delight for me.
Thank you. That was an intentional effort I remember with my editor, Tara Cooper out in Oregon, when I contracted with her and she started on the book, which, by the way, a wonderful, wonderful editor. I just sing her praises. I asked her, I said, can you please make sure I stay conversational? Don't let me drift into lecturing or academic, because I'm not academic, and don't let me get into that. And I love hearing that, because I have had people read the book and on a review or contact me and say it's like being in a classroom with you, because I teach at least every other week across the country. I teach leadership to law enforcement. In fact, in the morning, I fly to Minneapolis to teach in Wisconsin. And so, again, it's neat, I think, as an author to have a goal. And then if it gets met, that's pretty fulfilling. I would hate to miss that mark by a country mile, as we say here in Kentucky. But that was intentional. I wanted to have a dialogue and a conversation with people. So thank you again. That's nice to hear. That's an affirmation.
Good, because it was terrific and different from many, many, many of the books that I've read, which is why I love that so much. Something that is part of my love of teaching was going into the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Oh,
and you do such a fabulous job of explaining that these documents, plus all of the Supreme Court cases that have come down over the centuries, guides police investigation. And it's not, well, maybe it's there to guide you. Now, there's gray areas. You talk about not giving the ticket to the woman who's speeding and her husband's dying of cancer and her kids.
Right.
That's not what I'm talking about, but I'm talking like the real nitty gritty of investigation. You know, it's not a buffet that you go through it and you pick, oh, I kind of like this, and I'm going to ignore that. It does not work that way.
Right. It doesn't. And you make a good point. The discretionary level in law enforcement is at a much lower level, and with making those decisions on the roadside. But when it comes to rules of evidence and jurisprudence and court procedure, those are bright line rules. They can be very complex in detail. But then I think and what I try to do in the book is if you back away a little bit and get about 36,000 feet, they're really not that complex. And the bright line rules real clear at that point that these are the do's and don'ts. And I call those landmines. And they impact us making an investigation. But one of the things you saw in the book is for the people that engage in lay investigations, which I have no problem in as long as they know the rules, is to remind them that they can impact them as well. Maybe a couple tangents off, or the big thing back to victim advocacy, they can impact a case. And that's really tragic if somebody, maybe even well-intended, steps on one of those landmines and complicates a case. In a worst case scenario, I think it could destroy a shot at justice or delay it quite a bit. Sometimes you watch and it's almost sad. I think in the email you'd mentioned the importance of education and civics. and stuff like that. And maybe it's being taught. I know we got it in school. And again, I don't think everybody needs to be able to dissect a Supreme Court or an appellate or a circuit court opinion. But that said, what takes its place in the Ethernet is very naive assumptions. And again, those confuse people. They create levels of distrust and frustration. We've got a local case in Kentucky that's very active right now where last year a sheriff's office did a warrant at a home and ended up killing the homeowner at the doorway when they went in, and come to find out they were not at the right address, which is completely unacceptable in our world. And they went to the grand jury over the officer or officers that shot him, and the grand jury didn't indict. So people are going nuts. But the reality of it is what they went to the grand jury with was the actual shooting. And my guess is the ability to defend yourself is measured in fractions of seconds based on what you know in that moment. So a good theory on this is that those people that were involved in that, if they believe that they're at the right place and they believe the action they're taking is correct and somebody produces a gun on the other side of the door, self-defense is an immediate thing. Now, so people are frustrated, but the reality of it too is that there's a lot more that can happen. There can be civil lawsuits. The Department of Justice is already looking into it for what we'd call a 1983 civil rights violation for taking someone's life. And what that'll do is back out and look at how they got to the wrong door. Those things will be the justice served on that, which that family has coming, that community, but it'll just take a little longer. That said, a lot of people don't understand the grand jury process, and the first thing they fall to is corruption, people being bought out, judges being bought out. And it's kind of sad, but I understand it. But if they could take a deep breath and understand that there are multiple levels of justice and different avenues that this will be taken care of. So that's a real time when in our state right now that's going on. So.
Wow. You know, something we have to remember too is that the law enforcement officers who are enacting are human beings.
True. Very true. Mistakes will be made. Yeah.
Yes.
And I have to say that the goal is probably like if you were an industry standard of like an 09000 or Lean Six Sigma, the goal industry standard is to get as few mistakes as you can, because every industry has the opportunity for mistakes. But in this one, a mistake can take a life, or it can imprison somebody inappropriately. I always use the analogy of a commercial airplane pilot. There can be human mistakes there that are incredibly tragic. We had a flight back years ago here in Lexington where 49 people perished. And it was a combination of pilot and tower error, human error again. That emphasizes the importance of not making those mistakes and reducing those mistakes. And I'm going to share from personal experiences. The one thing that I do know about this one, with this warrant being in the wrong place, is flat out, that is sloppy, crummy police work, full of shortcuts and assumptions. And I don't know if I'm going to give them naive, because we're not really allowed to be naive when those things happen. You have to be trained. And again, back to the law, you have to be understanding of it. But when the police go to the wrong address, that's just more than sloppy. It's unacceptable. That said, here we are. It's human beings. So.
Do not misunderstand. My heart goes out to that family that was to open their door and whatever happened. But
absolutely,
something bad happened.
Yeah. And somewhere along the line, there has to be something. Equity theory demands that, is that there has to be something over that. I mean, this guy, if he reasonably thought that door was being hit the hard way with somebody doing a home invasion, and he died from that, then something has to happen with that. And again, something has to happen to balance the inappropriate and the mistake made by the police department. Something has to come from that. And I think that'll happen in time. It's just, again, when it goes to the grand jury and there's no true bill, there's no indictment, and it's a bitter pill for people that in that fractions of seconds, the same self-defense things that would cover you and I cover in that moment too. But again, it's not over. There's tons of remedies out there that can take place.
Right. This is just the first step in the process.
For sure.
I was going to say, they don't understand that this may not have come out the way you want it to, but it's not over. It's not
Exactly.
over. It may not be the justice you wanted, but there will be something coming in the future. Hang in there.
Yeah. We saw it in Louisville, 1 hour west of here during the Breonna Taylor shooting, is that, again, really, I've always just said this flat out, that was really crappy police work. But when you get to the immediacy of the shooting, there's those legal issues. And now you look at it, the DOJ's looked into it. There's officers that are going to jail for falsifying the affidavit on the search warrant that led to that. There was a civil suit with a large settlement for the family. Not that money brings anybody back or completely makes them whole again, but again, it's just that lack of knowledge from people to understand what fits at one moment and what doesn't. Pretty frustrating.
Exactly.
Pretty frustrating.
Yeah. Yes. Something else that you were writing about, Charlie O'Connell.
Oh, yeah. Charlie. Yeah. Yeah, we lost him. He had retired several years ago, and we lost him to heart disease just a few years ago in retirement. He had retired and gone into dispatch for a while and came out of that. And Charlie was one who was just, you want millions of cops like Charlie O. That's what we called him, because he was just so paced and rhythmic and wise and calm. And he was everything you want about a police officer. But I remember when I was just out on my own, or with what we call the field training program, my regular field training officer was off one night. So I got to ride in the prisoner wagon with Charlie O. Never met him before. And all I can say is it was 10 hours of a good time, and then 10 hours of a wiser, older person just dropping truth seeds and wisdom to somebody who had just started. And there were a lot of conversations, but when you ride the prisoner wagon, you're taking people off of an officer's hands and transporting them to the jail in the wagon. And I think it was after we had taken one of the many severely intoxicated people that we took to jail that night that he said that statement. He said, "Davey, you can't argue with somebody that is drunk or in love." And that resonates today. And I use that when I teach, when we talk about decision making and things like that and whatever. But both of those things are true. And then it's one of those things that when somebody gets loaded with a bias, it makes it hard to turn them around. And it resonated. It just one of those tidbits that you get from somebody like that and it just sticks with you. We all know what it's like to be in love, right? When we're the only ones that can't smell the sulfur and see the horns and the red eyes, and all your friends are trying to argue that. And we always joke in the industry that we will try everything we can not to arrest somebody, but they go and they get a sign that says, "You really have to take me to jail today." And that's the lack of reasoning. So I'd put that in there because it talks about when biases overcome us and the inability to keep our mind open to things and not be wavered on that. But that was a true mentoring moment from Charlie O.
Yes, but I think it so appropriately applies to what you're writing in the book about a lot of people in the true crime community who have the best intentions in the world.
Right.
But don't have the rules.
That's it. And again, in a lot of cases, I really think it's just being naive. And I'm older. I call them kids. I'll say the kids in the podcast world. And they really hunger to have a message. I think they hunger to do good. I think they hunger to have an impact. I think that's built inside all of us. I think that we have that as human beings. If they don't understand how to check that and use critical thinking skills, then I think that they can start to produce material that's harmful. I think if they're not experienced, I have families across the countries that reach out and ask, "Can you look at a case?" Believe it or not, sometimes I have to remind them I'm not investigating a case, which I would love to do, but I'm out of the game. But sometimes I'll look at the material they send me and I know they're questioning things, and I will look objectively and say, I really don't think that these thoughts you're having really are based on what I'm seeing, if that makes any sense. Kind of a reality check back to, I think I could support the idea that this person took their own life and nobody did that, and the suspicious circumstances are being handpicked. That's a difficult conversation to have.
Yeah.
They'll send you a complete closed case file with everything in it. Now, I can look at that and then politely to be honest with you, I make myself available. If I don't produce the case, I'll always tell them, you can call me and we'll just talk one day. We'll just talk and I'll walk you through this. Now, take that file and send that to a kid out in the true crime community that doesn't know how to look analytically at those things and doesn't understand when critical thinking has been given up to grieving and pain. And pretty soon I've watched them go on really hardcore campaigns on people that are they're in a very vulnerable position where they start to adopt the narrative and they name people and accuse them of murder, which is just crazy because that, one, out of fairness and ethics, and two, if that doesn't talk to you, civil liability should ring all the bells. Just the criticism they hold, and it's simply because they've never looked at something like that before. But to them, they've got this thing, and they'll produce that, they'll adopt that narrative and go forward with it. That can be harmful in a lot of ways. That can be harmful in a lot of ways. Sometimes families that are in this position, I think the biggest thing they have to have that we always try to provide was facts, code facts, being able to connect dots effectively to paint a picture. Because like I talk about in the book, they find themselves in a place where they're grasping. And it's almost like a drowning person that starts to grasp for wet reeds that aren't going to keep them up. And there's a thought that if I grasp for enough small things, then I can make sense of this and come up with an alternative theory. And sometimes there is no alternative theory. And what they really need is somebody to compassionately, gently remind them that these are the facts and that these are the things that I would recommend you start to metabolize that loss with, so you can, you never get over it. I think you saw in a book where Dr. Greg Davis said there's no closure, but you metabolize it. Back to my point, if a podcaster or content creator takes that and runs with that theory that's not founded, I think that just pushes that grieving, pushes that frustration down the road, maybe even snowballs it a little bit. So that would be my point with that again, is that, do you know what you're talking about when you say this? And back to the ethical part, why would you everly informally indict somebody, especially by name, maybe even where they live? That's taboo.
Yes.
That's one reason that one of the many reasons police don't share things about an active investigation. It's one of the reasons grand jury testimony is usually sealed, and people go nuts over that because a lot of things go in front of a grand jury and no true bill is delivered. And man, if we get in a world where we may be seeing this with the Epstein files right now. If we get in a world where you're just mentioned in something implies guilt, ooh, that's a rough place to be. I don't want to go down the Epstein file rabbit hole, but we see that right now. People are like, well, X is mentioned in those emails back and forth, and that doesn't always, it doesn't mean criminal conduct or even unethical or amoral conduct. So that's something I see in the industry. It's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is to start that dialogue about how can you create good content, but don't go so far. Don't subject yourself to that kind of liability. That's a dangerous place to be.
Well, we're seeing the liability. We just had that decision.
Right.
The Idaho jury awarded a $10 million damage to the University of Idaho professor, whose name I'm not going to use because it's already been dragged through the mud.
Mm-hmm.
And Ashley Gouliard has to pay $10 million in damages. She was a psychic who felt that this woman was connected to the four college students being killed. And she outed this professor and gave her address and was warned to stop. And she kept going. And she just got slammed. If that's not a wake-up call to people, it's like, listen, you really got to stick with facts.
That those things pop up. We don't hear a lot of them. What a wake-up call. A $10 million verdict, because even the amount, what that does is it really registers the fact that what you did was wrong. That is kind of like a large stick that had to hit you across the head. I agree with you, is that speaks to people that are in any of the content creator things. Is, again, when you're a detective, you feel things about people and you have strong suspicions, but man, you just don't say it. It defeats the process in the system, but at the same time, it's unethical. But I do know that there's content creators that get letters of cease and desist. They get warnings. There are some that I've watched in the last couple of years that have produced things that I cross my fingers for them. Because I do know that if I was the person on the other end of what they're doing, I would sue. Because it's just wrong. It's, and again, these cases, a lot of times I've looked at them and I'm like, If there was something to that, it's magical and it's deep. I don't see it, but they take and run with it. Yeah, that's an issue. That's an issue. And again, the part of the book is we need to start having a dialogue about this. Some podcasters, some of the Crimecons are starting to have more ethics sessions and things like that to talk about, do we go too far? Even Ashley Flowers several months ago did a quick reel, and she wasn't questioning their content with Crime Junkies. I'm not going to say that at all. But as an industry representative, she even casually mentioned that are there times that we go too far? And I thought, well, good, that's a good conversation to have. And again, I'm not saying Ashley and Britt did that because I like their stuff, actually. That's one of the first ones I listened to. But I'd hats off to them for tipping that out there, because we can protect victims and victim survivors, and we can also protect creators. We can protect people that want to take on some lay investigation, some web sleuthing. We can protect them too, and make sure that their work doesn't get them in trouble and actually advances a case as well. But a $10 million verdict. I could make a bad psychic joke right now and say, did she see that coming? But we'll leave that alone. So
yes, people posted that, believe me. Oh, yeah.
And that's a whole other thing in the whole true crime world is the intervention of psychics to talk to victims' families. We could do a different show on that one day. I have some reservations about it. I believe in that there's a fact that we are in a multi-spiritual dimension of living. I don't have any problem with that. But what if somebody either feigns that or their intentions are bad, the harm that they can do to a family, and the old charlatan, and what if it's somebody like that? But that might be an extreme. I think even most of the psychics that I've seen and encountered on different shows probably are smart enough to shut up and not go that far. Even if we're really registered with you, I think they know that we'll just stop short there. We'll stop short.
Yeah. Very early on, I do trilogies, and I had done a book, and the third part, which I call second cast, which I go into a different direction sometimes. So I wanted to do a cold case based on some of the demographics of the book. So I looked into the case of Kristen Sue Richardson, who went missing in Muskogee, Oklahoma. And it's a cold case, so it's an active case. And the first thing I did was to reach out to the Muskogee Police Department. And I'm like, hey, hi, I'm a podcaster looking at this. Do you have anything going on that I'm going to step on if I do this episode? Now, this was, this is long before, this is 5-6 years ago now. And they were very reluctant to talk to me because I think they have way more important things to do than to entertain Jill in Pennsylvania, who wants to do what with the case? Yeah. And it took a while, but I did get them to have some faith and trust in me. And they wouldn't come on the podcast, but they answered questions that I sent them, and I read the answers. And there's a suspect in this case, actually two, and I never named them. I explained the circumstances surrounding. I had the family members on who were very eager, because before I did anything, I reached out to the family members and like, is this okay? They were thrilled. And so when I was reading your book, because I'm testing myself as I'm going through, did I do that? Did I do this? Did I do this? It's like, oh, okay, good. I think I did good. I gave myself 5 stars. But it was really, what if there have a surveillance thing going on the day my podcast drops and her family says, oh, you got to listen to this. You got to listen to this.
Yeah.
Not that I'm like such a big, huge stir in the world, but in this case, in that town, yes. The last thing I wanted to do was to ruin something, create a ripple where there just did not need to be one. And please, people, check, look before you leap, read this book. Right. You talked about leaking information, and you used the example in the Delphi case when the photographs of the crime scene. I cried more tears over that case. I have no connection with any of these people. I've seen the families at Crimecon, but I've not engaged with them. But I cried more tears over this case, and to think about those pictures being out there, it was just trying to imagine that betrayal. And the podcast who received those pictures, the murder sheet, I've had them on. We talked about their book, and we talked about this. but they did the right thing and alerted the police immediately.
Yes. I was so impressed with that. I'm not going to say I was surprised, because I think most people are like you, and they have a pretty good moral compass, and they understand that when we get to a position we're not sure of, the best thing is to slow down or stop. But I was super impressed with that, because you're right. The trauma that would have on the family would be something. But can I say this, that in a case like that, that could have really made that trial difficult, because those details that would have been in those photographs were probably most of the leverage they had on the suspect that was eventually convicted. And they could have destroyed that. And I just know that, again, people get frustrated because the police won't share intimate details. But, it's that same old thing, Jill, that only two people know what that little thing meant right there. And I remember on that first serial killer I pulled, Tommy Lynn Sells, is that we didn't have hardly anything on that case. And it was my understanding that somebody in the medical examiner's office was fired for talking about something during the autopsy that made it back to the family. Tommy Lynn Sells ended up confessing in Texas, but the detail he gave, man, that detail was it. A false confessor, somebody with a mental health issue that wants to inject themselves, they gather the details. It's a lot like the thing, I think, with Madeline Kahn, is the guy that in the other country, is that what he did is he more than likely he consumed everything that he was catching in the media and was able to articulate and create a story and just really traumatize people for a long time with it. So I've seen it. I just thought, I always liked their material anyway, and I was like, that's pretty cool. And back to what you're talking about, again, thanks for the affirmation that maybe Davey did okay in the book and created a checklist. But everything you said was true, is that the police are reserved until we build a rapport with them. And that's usually of understanding. Because even when I reach out to police departments right now, is I might tell them, it's usually I don't in the beginning, but I'll tell them, I did what you did, and I'm not going to ask you any questions that you can answer. I'm not going to take you there. I just had a major police department in the Midwest, when I did an open records request, kind of shoot me something back that was really not true. And then I pulled the card and I said, hey, I used to run the unit that does what you all do. My list is specific. And they were like, oh, yeah, we found this. So it was like membership has its privileges every now and then. At the same time, I remember, I think I was shooting for the Weather Channel. Me and Wendy were on the Weather Channel, I think, for their true crime thing. And I remember it was either that or ID Discovery. But the producer were talking on a laptop like this while they're filming. He was talking about some of the other detectives didn't want to come on. And I said, well, they're reserved. And he goes, yeah, they are. And I said, yeah. I said, in the police world, they probably have seen it done more wrong than right with information we deliver. He made a good point, though, that in the true crime production world, if they ever burn a police department, they're done. I mean, it will clam up so tight, and it'll be like, hey, don't talk to this one or that production crew. I think that's pretty cool. I think it's neat to have you share that story about what it's like to have that rapport. And then in the business, we call it deconfliction, because police departments will deconflict with other law enforcement partners on major investigations to make sure, for example, that the DEA is not coming in and doing this while we're sending somebody doing this. And same thing with murder investigations. That probably spoke to those detectives that you cared. On the other side, I'm not going to name them. I refer to them in a book under my exhibits in the beginning, but I have heard some podcasts that almost made me want to puke when I saw what they were doing. And it's like so irresponsible to the point where I'm not even so it's naive anymore. I think it's just gratuitous. But the idea that they really don't care if they impact a case, really, really just boneheaded. But thank you I think you did. I think you got 5 stars. I think that's too
Thank
cool.
you.
And I think that's why and see what a great example moving forward for people. I spoke in the book about Gabby Mendler from up there, I think in British Columbia, and talking about how she did that work on Web Sleuths with the CCTV camera about a guy that was, and the high point on that was she sends the information and she waits. And she could have been somebody to get the feels on the internet. What do you think about this? And overlaying and everything. And I remember when I talked to Gabby, probably the most sincere thing I thought is like talking to you is she said, when she said that the detective or the sergeant or whatever called her back, she lit up. And it was like, it just the idea that she got that acknowledgement from somebody and they plainly said, you were right. That's how all this works. That's all this works. So good for you. I think if you continue that, Joe, you'll build a relationship because we talk to each other in the business. I think you'll build a relationship to where you can be that because listen, I talk to agencies all over the country and I'm not going to name any names, but there's some people that just trust me. I won't say where they're at because they're like, no way, that's not happening here. I'm not talking to that person because of the gratuitousness that they offer. So hats off to you. Hats off to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I've noticed lately, I've had authors on talking about books since the beginning, but lately there have been more retired law enforcement who are eager to be on. And that's nice. I hope that reputation is growing and that, they know I'm not going to twist or deceive. I love doing this podcast and I do it to remember the victims.
Sure.
To talk about some of the details. But at the same time, I don't tell everything that's in the book either, because that's not fair to my authors.
Oh,
so if you're going to want to know everything, then you're going to have to read the book because they do go into more detail. And
right.
The other thing that I struggle with, because I do try to be very victim-centric, is even when I'm advertising an episode, I go lightly with the images of the victims.
Yes. Yeah. We don't put pictures of decedents on our website. Matter of fact, I've backed off on imagery on the website considerably because it didn't plug in well. And during the episodes, nothing with the crime scene. In Kentucky, by the way, if I do an open records request on one of my cases, they will not send you pictures of a decedent, which I think is brilliant. That's not true everywhere else. I think it's brilliant. It adds nothing to it. I will share that hopefully today I get time, but we put a couple episodes out on a guy named Timmy Sterner. We did an episode with several interviews last year, and we just did an update with his father and his stepmother a couple months ago on a young man who gets out of prison and goes missing, and they found his remains. Just a couple weeks ago, his father, Tim, died. We had just had dinner with him and Ashley, so I need to do a memorial post of some kind. And the reason I'm slowing down is that I'm looking for the best images of Tim I can find because I want to memorialize him, not because you could tell I'll just share this, that when we had dinner with him, me and Wendy commented that his pallor was not great. I just don't think it was perfusing. I was like, I'm a little worried about him. And he winds up in the hospital and in hospice and passed away just 2 weeks ago. Oof. Back to the images. If I'm going to memorialize Tim, which we really came to really love these people, I'm probably going to go through on our episodes and montage that and share him talking and caring and showing who he is. But I think that's smart. But again, think what it's like if you're a kid and you're in this world and you get graphic photos of somebody who's been murdered. There's a decision to be made, I think. And I think that people are wrong when they share those. I know that in the O'Keefe murder, the big one up near Boston with Karen Reed, is that there were photos leaked of O'Keefe from an autopsy table. And I stumbled across it, didn't know who it was, but I saw some people, I think this, I think that. And I kind of challenged a few people because I didn't know who it was, about why is this here and what can y'all really offer? There's no forensic pathologist in this group. There's no medical people. And by the way, forensic pathology is so different than somebody who works on living people that are treating for injuries. Even that's a whole nother discussion that people get backwards. But most people agreed with me that, hey, this is over the pale, but you had some other people fight it virulently that we're trying to fix this. I'm like, no, you're really not. You're really not. Again, back to what that meant for his family. It was later I learned that it was O'Keefe. And I'm like, wow, just wow. So thank you. I think that's important, Jill. I think that how we I think both of us are memorializing people. I had a friend of mine ask when we started what our goal was. And he was like, he was worried about the exploitation thing. And I told him, I said, one thing to remember is that we don't exploit, but I said, we can take somebody and memorialize them and they live on the internet in perpetuity now. You take an old case and Google it, you might find an appellate record for the people that killed them. And I was like, that's not enough. That's who are these people? And so when we interview families, I always tell them, to your point, which I think is brilliant, I don't want to know where you think the case is or who you suspect. We can talk loosely. I'm going to protect the record on it. But I tell them I want diapers to disappearance. I want you to tell me about this person. And so now me and Wendy usually pre-meet over dinner or lunch. We ask them to look at some episodes. And it really is fulfilling that if you prepare a family for that, what they'll bring to the table. I did a phone interview with a guy that I met in Titusville, Florida on a case in Minnesota that we're producing right now. When I interviewed the guy on the phone yesterday, because we spoke, he went right there for those emotional beats about what this young man that he went to college with meant to him. And you feel very privileged to be taken to that part of their heart with those people. But again, hats off to you. There's another ethical conundrum with that, is that we're simply telling the best story on these people we can about who they were when they were alive.
Yeah.
I think that's important, and leaving a record for those people.
I'm doing books. Well, the book might be a few months old, like yours, or it might be 25 years old. Just the story resonated with me. The question that I have is, if I'm doing this, do I reach out to the family 25 years later and risk opening this wound that has been slowly scabbing over and the scar tissue? It's hard.
It's hard to locate people. I mean, because we all move, we change, we pass away, relationships change, and they fracture and things like that. I think that from what I see from your work is that would be commendable if you could do it, maybe take a shot at it. But I think the difference is you're synthesizing a piece of material that's 25 years old. There was a different memorialization of that. And my bet is, Jill, you would never cover that if it didn't resonate with you in a positive way. I'm just going out on a limb maybe there. So I think you're safe on that. And again, I think that you can talk about it at a plateau that doesn't pick that scab. I've gotten a privilege. In April, I've been invited to the Pikes Peak Writers Conference in Colorado Springs, and I just applied and landed 3 workshops where I'm going to work with authors in fiction on mystery writing and crime writing. And those, you can imagine, the topics are going to go around things like realism and ethics. And so a lot of what I'm going to bring to those authors, should they want to entertain them, I can tell them how to write, would be, how do you, if you base that fiction on a nonfiction event, what are the places where you might dip down so low that you do what you're talking about? Even on an older case, even if you're converting it to fiction, which is a possibility. I've thought if I ever find myself, I might take a bunch of conglomerate stuff that I experienced, and I don't know if I have a gift in that at all, but I might try to do one of those. That said, I think you're okay when we're memorializing something that's that old, but if a quick search for that person was possible, that's not bad. That's maybe a hat tip. Maybe they'll come in, and for your show, for example, maybe they'll come in and do a cameo and talk a little bit about the case, or talk about what their impression of the book was too. That's always a possibility too. So,
yeah, the authors are usually pretty eager to talk about it, especially if I'm going to give attention to a book that is 25 years old, because it does spur people to go out and read the book, which is, is in their benefit. And I'll use them for guidance as well. Have you spoken with so-and-so recently? Have you heard from them?
Right.
And a couple times I've been told, oh, no, they're done with it. They don't want to talk about it anymore. And I'm like, that's absolutely fine. And that is okay.
Yeah, our focus is usually the detectives. And if we can find somebody pretty quick, we'll find them. But there's been a couple cases that, well, I'll share one. When I was much younger, when I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, I was in our Police Explorer program. And a really neat woman, a young woman, was in that program too. And I'll never forget, we move on. I come to Lexington, and right at the time I started in a homicide unit, she was murdered in Louisville. She was leaving her job at a bank at 5:30 in the afternoon, was shot in the parking lot and died. And I reached out to the family and talked to them. I'd met some of them before, and we shared a lot of stories, and I told them what I did and what I do in the podcast. And after a lot of back and forth and them talking to other family members, it was pretty much the same thing. It's an unsolved homicide, but they really weren't interested right now in re-engaging it, because this sounds odd to some people, but if they don't get solved, I think that a lot of people start to really want to just let the scar tissue start to firm. And so as much as I would have loved to carry her case, because this was a good friend of mine. At the same time, we had really good discussions. Again, we shared a lot of memories of who she was. But in the end, you could just tell they weren't. So I backed off on that one. There's a couple that we've done that with too. Again, we focus on the nomenclature. We could really, even in a few cases, we could take the victim's name out and the audience would still be interested because we're talking about what the mechanics are of these investigations and things like that more than anything else. So yeah, sometimes I think that healing process is different. It's different. We run into that is that a lot of times we're approached. If I sense any reluctancy, I start to tap back quite a bit. And I never, like the one I'm talking about from Minnesota, I never email them and say, hey, I've got 2 weeks coming up. Do you want to do this? It's like, I always, when you're ready, let me know.
Yep.
I've got another one like that where I think they're going to be ready to start sitting down and doing interviews in a couple of weeks. But number one rule is no pressure. No pressure. If we don't produce the material, this is horrible, but there's a lot out there, unfortunately. Yes. It's a horrible thing, but there's a lot out there. So
I had to go to Kindle and maybe even another because I'm maxing storage on all kinds of books that I'm asked to cover, which is a terrible problem to have, right? To be backed up.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So it's going to be a while before I think I'm going, oh gosh, what am I going to do next? Oh no, I've got 10 books lined up in the hopper. I need 3 more Jills. But I'm not going to hurting the family that still has to deal and this person's still missing from their life. That's not why I'm doing this.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, thank you for reaching in and finding me somewhere in that pile. So I'm grateful. It was so flattering when I got your message that, again, when you're new to this and you get some kind of an affirmation or acknowledgement from somewhere out in the real world, it's very good. So I'm very grateful for that. And we're the same way. The only thing that restricts us from probably producing maybe weekly is me and Wendy's schedule. She owns 3 child daycares. I love what I do. In March, I'm out almost pretty much every week, I think, except one. And then I've got some short runs like this one this next week. But I've gotten better about pre-production, probably like you. There's a workflow process I have now about reaching further in and finding content. And then the big thing is our schedule and then the people that we want to actually interview.
Right.
It's a sad world we live in because there's way too many people that are missing that have never been found. There's a lot of people who have lost loved ones and friends to violence. I don't think they ever got a place to stand up and say he or she meant everything to me. And that he or she, no matter what life they were walking, that they deserved better. And because I remember that back in the unit when we worked cases is that you'll have people that get this naive idea that law enforcement only works on cases where the people are from something. That's one of the problems with the Nancy Guthrie case, by the way. Not that it's a problem is it probably is reinforcing a concept that people have that unless you come from money or fame, they don't care about your case. And I remind people right now, that's the media doing that and not the agency. Just trust me on that. But here we go. Yeah. The idea that can we memorialize these people? Can they stand up and say that, hey, they had a drug abuse problem. They had this problem or that problem. But, when somebody takes their life, then they rob them of the ability to ever turn around and have a family and stuff like that. So I think that's a lot of what we do. And unfortunately, there's still so many people have never been able to say that. They've never been able to say that. So
very well said. Thank you. David, is there another book coming? Are you talking about possibly delving into fiction?
Yeah, possibly. I'm starting to tinker. Wendy had an idea one day and about writing on the cases that we've covered in detail. And I'm tinkering with that it's a time thing. Writing this book, I would have had it published earlier if I had not procrastinated for a little bit. But I think if I decide to do that, I think I know what time structure and prioritization looks like now as far as assembling something like that. I've thought seriously about continuing to put something out and maybe going ahead and putting a casework book out of it maybe something that I worked or me and my friends worked. I think there's a thirst for it, and I think there's a thirst for authenticity when it's done as well. And on the other side, there's a leadership concept book that I actually parked for this one, and I'm starting to get that inkling to start assembling that. That'll be a different genre altogether, but I think it's an important message in that one. I think I've said before that True Crime and Consequences is the start of a dialogue.
Yeah.
I never want to say I have all the answers, but sometimes you have to interject some opinions and some experiences to get people to start talking. I think when I wrote it, and I told Wendy one time that if I can speak on it publicly, that'd be fantastic. And she goes, well, what if people don't agree? And I said, well, really, when you write something like this, it's about stimulating disagreement. It's about the idea that can we start a conversation where we find out where we're missing each other in it. And there'll be some true crime people that produce true crime content that will read the book and get angry, I think, because I think it steps on that naiveness that I talked about before, that it's almost like mom or dad coming home from vacation and catching the kids playing. And there's a little bit of that in there, is the idea. I think that we can entertain a lot of conversation. I'll leave it with this part on that when it comes to somebody risking real justice in a courtroom, I get really defensive. And I can put up with educating people. I can really take people and work we do with these victims' families all the time. But on the outside of that, people that aren't associated, it's kind of like I said in the book with Popeye, I had all I can stands and I can't stands no more. And at some point, it's like somebody who's done it needs to look over and say that's not right. I know how strongly you feel about it, but that is not right. Not everybody will be happy with it, but maybe I can foresee after getting some response back from this, getting more input on it, that it'll be ready for the conversation to continue, at least on that. But the fiction thing, maybe I have to get educated on that. I'm not a writer by nature at all, so I'll have to really learn more about that. Probably when I do this writers conference in April, because I'll be attending all the sessions anyway. So maybe I'll learn something out there.
Look at that, going and learning about something before jumping madcap into it.
That exactly.
Who would have
What a
thought
concept. Yeah, what a concept. Yeah, just because I'm excited about it, but it's like jumping in a pool without swim lessons or swimmies, right? I just know that, and you know this because you do so much literary work, there's a process for this. There's methods of how your information flows to make it attractive to people should the content be any good. You're like me. We've both read some crummy stuff. And I would never say my book is great at all, but I didn't want it to be crummy. I'm one of those people that when I read things, Jill, if you don't have me within a few paragraphs, if you shoot a vocabulary that isn't yours and it isn't mine and stuff like that, I'll put it up. I tried to read a book about a case we covered on a man's grandparents who were both murdered in Kentucky years ago, and he referred me to an author, and the guy is probably a nice guy, but it was like, holy cow. Kind of at least start getting to the story. I don't know what this is. I'm so glad mine resonated differently. I was scared of that a little bit. But I think if we just talk, that's where it works best. I think it's where it works best.
Yes. Well, David, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Murder Bookies, you have got to go out and read True Crime and Consequences. It is vitally important. And if you're a creator, even more so.
Thank you. That's a point that I started making at some of the other conferences I attended to sell the book, is that if you're a content creator, it'll help you with all the moral discussions. But can I add this too, that if you're a writer and you pay attention to what I do about motivations and intentions, there's character development that can be found in this book. Is that if you really pay attention, I take you into what it's like in a police department, and when people are doing cases, there's character development in there too. So I'd be appreciated if people went. It's available at Amazon and Joseph Beth and all the booksellers. And if you subscribe to Kindle, it's still free on Kindle, or if you use your points. So that's a good way to grab the book as well. So
I have more points than I will ever know what to do with.
I do.
Ever.
And that's where I do most of my reading too, Jill, is I'll look and I'm like, I got to get some of these points done. So I do the same thing.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, take care now.
Oh, for sure.
Oh my gosh. When we stopped recording, David and I talked for another hour. What an amazing guy. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Listen, sometimes it's hard to hear criticisms, but criticism also helps you improve. And that's why I hope you will buy David's book, True Crime and Consequences. It is a true crime manual that will help all of us to do the right thing when it comes to civilian examinations of cases, to make the right choices, true guidelines so we do not end up like Ashley Gilliard with a jury awarding $10 million in damages. So whether you are a diehard podcast fan, a justice seeker, or just a curious citizen, True Crime and Consequences will challenge you to think about what you know and what you don't, and invites you to have a deeper conversation about truth, impact, and responsibility. I really appreciate your open minds on this particular book and for joining me on this journey. It is never a dull moment. And thank you for listening. And I want to thank my Patreon murder bookies for our next book choice, While She Slept by Marion Collins. My next episode is coming shortly. Men and women meet, they fall in love, and then life happens. Relationships fray and divorces happen. And we see this happening every day. However, as people who follow true crime, we know that not every failing relationship follows a normal trajectory. And this is that story. In the meanwhile, I would love your help. If you enjoy my podcast, please take a moment to leave a glowing 5-star review wherever you listen. Your support is crucial in attracting more murder bookies. Join me on Patreon at www.patreon.com/murdershelf book club for our monthly Zoom call and my serial killer case studies on the first Thursday of each month, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Exciting news, my merch shop is open, and with Crimecon coming in May, you will not want to miss out. And Jan, who does my merch, is so incredible. You can find me on X, Facebook, and Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. All of my sources are on my blog at www.murdershelfbookclub.com. And don't hesitate to reach out to me via email at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com. Thank you for being part of this journey. I see you as you hear me. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.